May 2026, 11:47 p.m. Somewhere over occupied Crimea, a corridor opened in the electronic noise. 11 minutes wide. Ukrainian strike drones flew through it like arrows through a gap in armor. At the far end sat the most dangerous jamming system on the peninsula, a machine that had been quietly strangling Ukrainian drone operations for months. When it erupted in a fireball visible from 40 kilometers away, Russian electronic warfare coverage over the northwestern Black Sea collapsed within hours. But this was not luck. This was not improvisation. This was 72 days of hunting. I'm your host at Steel Horizon, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Tonight we're breaking down one of the most sophisticated deep strike operations Ukraine has executed in this conflict: the destruction of Russia's Murmansk-BN electronic warfare system in occupied Crimea. This is not a story about a single drone hitting a single target. It's a story about how Ukraine hunts systems, how it dismantles entire layers of Russian capability one precision strike at a time, and how one 11-minute window changed the electronic warfare balance over the Black Sea. Real tactics, real consequences. Steel Horizon. To understand what Ukraine destroyed in May 2026, you need to understand what the Murmansk-BN actually is, and why Russian commanders considered it almost untouchable. The system is Soviet-era, but do not let that fool you. It is not obsolete. The Murmansk-BN is a high-frequency shortwave jamming complex capable of disrupting communications across a radius of up to 5,000 kilometers. 5,000. That is not a typo. From a single deployment site in Crimea, this system could interfere with NATO aviation communications over Poland, suppress satellite uplink frequencies used by Ukrainian UAV operators along the entire southern front line, and degrade the command and control architecture that keeps Ukrainian drone units coordinated and lethal. It had been doing exactly that since late 2025, when Russian forces repositioned it to a concealed site on the peninsula, a site Ukrainian intelligence did not initially know existed. The Murmansk-BN is not a truck. It is a mobile complex of specialized vehicles, antenna masts that extend to enormous heights, power generation units, command and control modules, and support equipment. When deployed, it occupies a footprint roughly the size of a football field. When packed and moving, it blends into military convoy traffic. That mobility was the first thing that made it dangerous to target. The second, it was positioned deep inside a Russian air defense cluster. 400 batteries operated within range. Tor M2 short-range systems covered low-altitude approaches. Panzer S-1 units provided close-in defense against small aerial vehicles. The site also rotated its maintenance schedule irregularly, a deliberate counter-surveillance measure that made predicting vulnerability windows extraordinarily difficult. Russian commanders had designed a layered protection scheme that, on paper, made the Murmansk-BN essentially immune to a conventional Ukrainian strike. Which weapon proved most decisive in bringing it down? FPV drones, long-range strike platforms, or naval decoys working in coordination? Comment below. A. FPV swarm. B. Long-range strike drones. C. Naval drone feint. The answer is embedded in this operation, and it will surprise you. Ukrainian GUR. Military intelligence. First detected anomalous electronic interference patterns consistent with a Murmansk-BN deployment in late November 2025. Drone operators across multiple units in Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts had been reporting intermittent signal degradation that did not match known Russian short-range jamming profiles. The interference was too broad, too powerful, and came from a direction pointing south, toward Crimea. Signal analysis teams identified the spectral signature as consistent with a high-frequency shortwave jamming platform operating at peak output for extended periods, a signature matching the Murmansk-BN's known operational profile. A targeting team was assembled within GUR's Special Operations Analytical Division. The clock started. The first 72 days of the operation were almost entirely invisible. No strikes, no provocations, just collection. GUR analysts combed commercial satellite imagery archives, looking for vehicle signatures consistent with a Murmansk-BN deployment at known and suspected Russian military sites across the peninsula. The search area was enormous. The system could be operating from any of dozens of prepared and improvised military positions scattered across Crimea's varied terrain. 3 months of observation. And for the first 6 weeks, no confirmed result. The satellites kept passing overhead on their orbital tracks. Analysts kept cross-referencing imagery against thermal signatures, vehicle shadow geometries, and the subtle ground disturbance patterns that accompany a high-power electrical installation. Drone operators kept flying degraded signals and filing operational reports. The frustration inside Ukrainian intelligence was significant. One GUR officer, speaking to Ukrainian media after the operation concluded, described those early weeks as hunting a ghost that is actively hiding from you. Then, in the second week of January 2026, a Maxar Technologies satellite pass over a site near the western coast of Crimea captured something interesting. A thermal anomaly consistent with high-power electrical generation, surrounded by a vehicle arrangement that did not match standard Russian garrison patterns. The antenna mast signatures were partially obscured by camouflage netting, but the shadow geometry was wrong for standard equipment. A specialist team was tasked with full analysis. 48 hours later, probable identification. The ghost had a location. Stay with me, because what happens in the next phase nearly forces Ukraine to abandon the mission entirely. Probable was not confirmed, and confirmed was not targetable. The site's air defense coverage was a serious problem. Direct approaches from Ukrainian-controlled territory would pass through multiple radar coverage zones before reaching effective strike range. Any conventional cruise missile approach would have to defeat S-400 engagement envelopes at 3 separate points along its flight path. Storm Shadow missiles. The British supplied precision weapons that had already struck multiple high-value Crimean targets, were theoretically capable, but the site's camouflage and the uncertainty about exact antenna positions made a single-strike solution unreliable. If the first strike missed the critical components, the system would simply relocate. And next time, it would be harder to find. HUMINT changed the calculation. Local resistance networks. Ukrainian citizens operating covertly inside occupied Crimea had been quietly developing intelligence on Russian military logistics for months. In February 2026, a contact embedded within Russian military supply chains passed critical information to GUR handlers. The Murmansk-BN site operated on a maintenance cycle that brought technicians and specialized parts vehicles to the location on a roughly predictable schedule. More critically, the contact identified that during these maintenance windows, the system's active jamming output was partially reduced to prevent interference with Russian military communications in the immediate area. The antenna configurations changed. The power levels dropped. The system's own protection requirements created a temporary vulnerability window, perhaps 10 to 15 minutes during the initial power-down sequence. Not long, but enough if you knew exactly when it was coming. I spent time working through the open-source reconstruction of this targeting package, and one detail kept pulling my attention back. The coordination between 3 completely different intelligence streams: satellite imagery, intercepted Russian maintenance radio traffic, and human source reporting from inside occupied territory, had to align perfectly to produce an actionable strike window. Any one of those streams failing would have collapsed the entire operation, and one of them almost did. In early March 2026, the HUMINT source went silent. For 11 days, GUR had no contact. The handlers did not know if the source had been compromised, arrested, or simply forced into radio silence by increased Russian FSB activity on the peninsula. If compromised. If Russian counterintelligence had identified the asset, the operation's cover might be blown entirely. The targeting package would need to be scrapped. The Murmansk-BN would relocate. Months of work, gone. Strike planners were told to prepare contingency options in case the primary approach was burned. Storm Shadow delivery profiles were quietly dusted off and stress-tested, even though the targeting package was not yet mature enough to support them. The mood inside the planning cell was grim. The source re-established contact on day 12. The silence had been exactly what it appeared to be, a security precaution during an FSB sweep of the local area. The intelligence pipeline was intact. The operation resumed. By late April 2026, the targeting package was complete. GUR had confirmed the maintenance schedule with high confidence. They had identified the precise deployment positions of the Murmansk-BN's antenna masts and command modules. They had mapped the air defense coverage around the site, the S-400 battery's radar cone, the Tor M2 coverage arcs, the Panzer positions, the locations of visual observation posts. And critically, they had identified what they called the Eastern Attention Window, a pattern in Russian air defense behavior where Kerch Strait monitoring absorbs significant sensor attention during periods of increased naval activity near the crossing. The strike package design built that window directly into its architecture. Here is what this operation actually shows. The Murmansk-BN was not destroyed because Ukraine got lucky or because Russia made a single catastrophic error. It was destroyed because Ukraine had spent years building a multi-source intelligence architecture. Satellite, signals, human. That makes precision deep strike possible against defended high-value targets. The Russians assumed that mobility and air defense coverage were sufficient protection. Ukraine proved that against a patient, sophisticated adversary, those protections are not enough. Subscribe to Steel Horizon if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because this operation is textbook. How many vehicles in the Murmansk-BN support convoy were confirmed destroyed in the strike? A. 4 vehicles. B. 7 vehicles. C. 11 vehicles. Stay with us. The answer comes after the strike reconstruction. The strike package that launched on the night of May 14th into the 15th, 2026, was a layered operation involving at least 3 distinct elements, timed to execute in a precise sequence across an 11-minute window. Ukrainian officials have not publicly confirmed all details, and some elements of what follows are reconstructed from open-source intelligence, satellite imagery analysis, and GUR briefings shared with Ukrainian media. This is the most complete picture available. Phase 1 launched at 11:31 p.m. A wave of commercial-grade FPV drones, approximately 18 platforms based on post-strike debris analysis, approached the Murmansk-BN site from the northwest. These were not precision strike weapons. They were not intended to destroy anything. They were bait. Their purpose was to trigger the site's active electronic countermeasures and force Russian radar operators to light up their detection systems. Each FPV platform was expendable, roughly $400 a unit. The cost of revealing the exact position of every active air defense emitter at the site was priceless. As the FPV wave approached at low altitude, Russian operators did exactly what the planners had predicted. They activated short-range air defense radars and began tracking the incoming threats. Those radar emissions were immediately captured by Ukrainian SIGINT platforms and fed into the strike fire control system, precisely locating every active emitter at and around the site. The Russians had just told Ukraine exactly where to aim. Phase 2 launched at 11:36 p.m., 5 minutes after the FPV wave. 2 Magura V5 naval drones. The Ukrainian-developed surface attack platforms that had already sunk and damaged multiple Russian Black Sea Fleet vessels, launched from concealed positions and moved at high speed toward the Kerch Strait. This was the Eastern Attention feint. The Magura V5 is a serious naval weapon, roughly 5 meters long, capable of carrying 320 kilograms of explosive payload with a top speed exceeding 42 knots. 2 of them moving aggressively toward the strait generated exactly the response the planners intended. Russian naval surveillance systems shifted attention eastward. Coastal defense radar arrays rotated. Air defense units in the eastern approaches moved to engagement postures. The pressure on the Murmansk-BN site's coverage sector, coming from the northwest, decreased noticeably. The maintenance window was scheduled to open at approximately 11:40 p.m., the moment when Russian technicians would begin the power-down sequence for a scheduled component check. The S-400 battery supporting the site was in a reduced readiness configuration during this window, a detail the HUMINT source had confirmed. Russian air defense units were understaffed for overnight rotations and relied on extended radar coverage from adjacent positions during short maintenance cycles. That worked fine against conventional threats. It did not work against what was coming. At 11:43 p.m., 3 minutes into the maintenance window, GUR's electronic warfare units opened a suppression corridor. The exact methods remain classified, but the operational effect is documented. Ukrainian strike drones operating in the corridor experienced clear signal environments where previously they had been fighting heavy jamming interference. The corridor was the key. Without it, the strike platforms could not navigate reliably through Russian EW noise. With it, they had a clear path. If you think innovative tactics win modern wars more decisively than raw firepower, type Steel Horizon in the comments. This operation is the argument. The strike drones. Ukrainian-produced long-range platforms, believed to be advanced variants of domestically developed systems, entered the corridor at 11:44 p.m. They were flying pre-programmed routes updated in real time with the precise emitter locations captured from the FPV trigger phase. At 11:51 p.m., 7 minutes after corridor entry, the first impacts hit the Murmansk-BN site. Multiple warheads struck in rapid succession. The antenna mast support vehicles went first, then the command module, then the power generation unit. The entire strike sequence lasted under 90 seconds. The fireball from the power generation unit's fuel and electrical systems was visible from 40 kilometers away. Russian night vision camera footage from a checkpoint near Bakhchisarai, later leaked to Ukrainian telegram channels, showed the glow clearly on the southern horizon. Put yourself in the position of a Russian air defense operator at 11:52 p.m. on May 15th. Your radar is showing FPV drones to the northwest, naval drones near the Kerch Strait. Your communications are fragmented because the EW unit you relied on is actively burning, and your command network is reporting conflicting threat assessments from 3 directions simultaneously. You cannot reliably distinguish the real threats from the feints. You cannot coordinate with adjacent units because the coordination frequency is degraded. And somewhere in that noise, the strike that just incinerated your most valuable electronic warfare asset is already recovering back toward Ukrainian lines. That is exactly the cognitive overload the operation was designed to create. Not just physical destruction, but systemic confusion. Here is the unpopular take. Russian electronic warfare doctrine assumed that the Murmansk-BN's mobility was its primary survivability asset, the moment it was emplaced for an extended period, which operational requirements demanded. That assumption became a fatal liability. Russian commanders chose to accept that risk because the system's jamming output was too valuable to sacrifice by constant relocation. Ukraine identified that trade-off and exploited it systematically. The failure was not tactical. It was doctrinal. Russia built a system designed for Cold War strategic deterrence and deployed it in an environment where Ukraine has demonstrated the ability to hunt and destroy exactly these kinds of high-value fixed or semi-fixed targets. The decision to keep the system in place long enough to be found was the real command error, made it a level far above the site's operators. What do you think? Was keeping the Murmansk-BN in place long enough to be found an acceptable operational risk given its output value, or was this a command failure that was always going to lead here? Drop your analysis in the comments. The post-strike assessment, reconstructed from satellite imagery, Ukrainian General Staff reporting, and OSINT analysis, is significant. The Murmansk-BN complex was confirmed destroyed. Satellite imagery captured within 6 hours of the strike showed the site's vehicle positions as burnt-out hulls in thermal imaging. 7 support vehicles, confirmed by debris, analysis, and imagery interpretation, were destroyed in the strike. The antenna infrastructure, which takes months to replace and requires specialized transport equipment Russia does not have in theater in sufficient quantities, was eliminated. The answer to our earlier question: 7 vehicles confirmed destroyed. Not 4, not 11. Russian electronic warfare coverage over the northwestern Black Sea collapsed within hours of the strike. Ukrainian drone operators across multiple units in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Odessa oblasts reported immediate, measurable improvement in signal integrity starting in the early morning hours of May 15th. OSINT monitoring of Ukrainian FPV strike footage from the days following the operation showed a dramatic increase in successful engagement completion rates, consistent with significantly reduced electronic countermeasure interference in the affected sectors. Ukrainian sources estimated that Russian EW coverage in the affected sector degraded by over 60% in the immediate aftermath, and that no replacement system capable of matching the Murmansk-BN's capability was within 800 kilometers of the peninsula. Intercepted Russian military communications, fragments later shared with Ukrainian media through GUR channels, revealed something close to panic in the command chain. One intercepted exchange included a senior officer demanding to know who had authorized the site's static deployment posture for an extended period without implementing proper emission control protocols. Another fragment referenced emergency requests for transfer of replacement EW assets from Russian territory, requests that received no confirmed fulfillment timeline in the intercepted traffic. The system's destruction left a hole in Russian electronic warfare architecture over the Black Sea that Russian forces could not quickly fill. The broader strategic impact unfolded over the following weeks. Ukrainian naval drone operations in the northwestern Black Sea showed increased effectiveness. Russian naval assets operating in ranges previously covered by the Murmansk-BN's communications disruption capability became more vulnerable to Ukrainian drone approaches. The operation did not single-handedly transform the Black Sea strategic balance, but it removed a critical layer of protection Russian commanders had been relying on, and it demonstrated Ukraine's ability to execute complex, multi-element, intelligence-driven deep strikes against defended high-value systems far behind the line of contact. There is a specific detail in this operation that has stayed with me since working through the reconstruction. The 17-day communications blackout from the HUMINT source in March 2026 nearly killed the entire mission. In that silence, the planners had to make a decision: continue parallel preparation on the assumption the source was intact, or stand down and accept that the targeting package was potentially compromised. They continued. The source came back. The operation succeeded. If the planners had made the conservative choice, the Murmansk-BN might still be operating over Crimea today. Sometimes the most important tactical decision in a complex operation is the one made in the absence of information, under maximum uncertainty, with everything on the line. One thing is certain after this operation: Ukraine does not just strike targets. Ukraine hunts systems. It identifies the critical nodes in Russian capability architecture: the EW platforms, the logistics hubs, the command networks, and it builds the intelligence and operational infrastructure to reach them methodically. The Murmansk-BN was not a target of opportunity. It was a deliberate choice to degrade a specific Russian capability at a specific moment, executed with a precision and patience that reflects something the Ukrainian military has developed over years of this conflict: the ability to think about warfare not in individual engagements but in terms of systematic capability destruction. Will Ukraine replicate this kind of multi-element, intelligence-driven deep strike against other Russian high-value EW systems over the next 6 months? Comment yes or no, because the operational pattern we are tracking in open-source analysis suggests this is becoming doctrine, not exception. The tactical lesson from the Murmansk-BN operation is straightforward and applicable far beyond this conflict. Mobility is only a survivability asset if you actually use it. A mobile system that remains static long enough to be located and targeted is a high-value target with wheels. Ukraine exploited exactly this contradiction, and the result was the collapse of Russian electronic warfare coverage across an entire sector of the Black Sea. Subscribe to Steel Horizon, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The answer to our quiz: 7 vehicles in the Murmansk-BN support convoy were confirmed destroyed. Not 4, not 11. 7. The command module carriers, the power generation vehicle, the antenna deployment platforms, and the primary maintenance support units. The precision of the strike, hitting the right vehicles in the right sequence to ensure the antenna infrastructure was unrecoverable, reflects the quality of a targeting package that 72 days of intelligence collection produced. 3 questions worth sitting with after this operation. Was the decision to keep the Murmansk-BN emplaced in a static position for extended periods the right operational choice, given its jamming output value versus its targeting vulnerability? Could Russian air defense commanders around the site have prevented this outcome if they had implemented more aggressive electronic emissions control during maintenance windows? And what would you have done differently? As a Ukrainian planner with a confirmed target location but a 17-day communications blackout from your primary intelligence source, would you have continued the preparation or stood the operation down? Real tactics, real consequences. Steel Horizon. The site in Crimea is quiet now. The antenna masts that once stretched toward the sky are collapsed wreckage. The command vehicles are burnt shells. The jamming signal that disrupted Ukrainian drone operations across the southern front line is gone. What remains is a lesson written in satellite imagery and intercepted panic communications. In modern warfare, no system is truly untouchable. Patience, intelligence, and precisely executed multi-element operations can reach targets that conventional strikes cannot. Ukraine demonstrated that again in May 2026, and Russia has not yet found an answer. Stay vigilant.